You have 30 days to get out. My father's voice was cold as steel as he handed me the official eviction notice. I stood in the doorway of what had been my childhood bedroom, staring at the legal document that would make me homeless on my 18th birthday. Dad, what is this? My voice cracked despite my attempt to stay strong. This is my home. Not anymore, my mother, Carol, said from behind him, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. You're an adult now, Madison. Time to figure things out on your own. My name is Madison Clark, and I'm now 28 years old. But 10 years ago, I was standing in that cramped hallway of our ranch house in Phoenix, Arizona, holding an eviction notice like I was some stranger who'd been squatting in their property. The worst part? Through the thin walls, I could hear my 20-year-old sister Jennifer laughing on the phone with her boyfriend in her room next door. The same sister whose luxury apartment rent my parents had been paying for the past 3 years, while she found herself at Arizona State University. You can't be serious, I whispered, my hands shaking as I read the legal terminology. Where am I supposed to go? My father, Robert, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and straightened his shoulders. At 52, he was a man who prided himself on being logical and fair. At least, that's what he told everyone at his accounting firm. You'll figure it out, Madison. Jennifer did. The lie hit me like a slap. Jennifer hadn't figured out anything. She dropped out of college after her sophomore year and moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Scottsdale that cost $1,900 a month. Money that came directly from my parents' joint checking account, along with her car payment, insurance, groceries, and spending money. But somehow, I was the one who needed to figure it out. This isn't fair, I said, hating how young and desperate I sounded. I graduate in 3 weeks. I have a job lined up at the local bank. I could pay rent. Life isn't fair, honey, Carol said, but there was no warmth in the endearment. We've done our job raising you. Now it's time for you to become independent. Independent. The word tasted bitter. I'd been working part-time jobs since I was 14, saving every penny for college while Jennifer got a brand new car for her 16th birthday. I'd been doing my own laundry, cooking my own meals, and basically raising myself while they focused all their attention on their precious older daughter. What about college? The question came out smaller than I intended. My parents exchanged a look that I'd seen 1,000 times before. The look that said they'd already discussed this and made their decision without including me in the conversation. Community college is perfectly fine for someone in your situation, Robert said. Jennifer needs our support right now while she transitions into her art career. Art career? Jennifer had been transitioning into her art career for 2 years, which mostly involved posting abstract paintings on Instagram and working part-time at a coffee shop when she felt like it. Meanwhile, I had a full scholarship to Arizona State University waiting for me, the same school Jennifer had dropped out of. The same scholarship I'd earned through 4 years of straight A's, volunteer work, and writing essays about overcoming adversity. I earned that scholarship, I said, my voice getting stronger. I worked for it. And you can still use it, Carol said with a shrug. You'll just have to figure out housing and living expenses on your own. Builds character. Character. I'd been building character my entire life while Jennifer had been handed everything on a silver platter. The eviction notice crumpled in my fist as the reality sank in. They were really doing this. They were throwing their own daughter out on the street while paying thousands of dollars a month to support their other daughter's fantasy lifestyle. Does Jennifer know about this? I asked. The guilty look that flashed across my mother's face told me everything I needed to know. This doesn't concern Jennifer, Robert said firmly. This is between us and you. Of course it didn't concern Jennifer. Nothing ever concerned Jennifer when it came to consequences or responsibility. I turned and walked into my bedroom, closing the door behind me with as much dignity as I could manage. The room was small and plain, with a twin bed I'd had since I was 10, and a desk I'd bought myself with money from my job at the grocery store. Through the wall, I could still hear Jennifer laughing on her phone, probably making plans for another weekend trip to California that my parents would fund without question. I sat on my bed and looked around at the only home I'd ever known. The walls were covered with certificates and awards from school, perfect attendance, honor roll, student of the month. None of it mattered now. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend, Sarah. "Want to come over for dinner? Mom's making tacos." I stared at the message, tears blurring my vision. Sarah's family had always welcomed me with open arms, treating me like the daughter they never had. Mrs. Rodriguez would feed me, ask about my grades, and actually listen to my answers. Mr. Rodriguez would help me with my car when it broke down and never asked for payment. They were more family to me than the people whose DNA I shared. I typed back, "Can I call you?" My phone rang immediately. "Madi, what's wrong?" Sarah's voice was full of concern. "They're kicking me out," I said, and then the whole story poured out. The eviction notice, Jennifer's rent being paid while I was being thrown out, the casual cruelty of it all. Sarah was quiet for a long moment after I finished. "You're coming to stay with us," she said finally. "Mom's already nodding. We have the guest room and you can stay as long as you need." "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. We're telling you. Pack your stuff. Dad's coming to get you in an hour." That night, I sat in Sarah's family's warm kitchen, eating Mrs. Rodriguez's homemade enchiladas while they discussed my future like I was their own child. "The scholarship covers tuition and books," Mr. Rodriguez said, reading through the paperwork. "You'll need about $800 a month for living expenses if you get a dorm room." "I can work more hours at the grocery store," I said. "Maybe pick up a second job." "Mija," Mrs. Rodriguez said softly, "you're already working 25 hours a week and carrying a full course load. You need to focus on your studies." "I don't have a choice." Mr. Rodriguez leaned forward, his weathered hands folded on the table. He'd worked construction for 30 years to put his 3 kids through college, and his calloused fingers told the story of sacrifice and hard work. "There's always a choice," he said. "Sometimes it's just harder to see." Over the next few weeks, the Rodriguez family helped me navigate my new reality. Sarah's mom took me shopping for dorm room supplies with money I tried to refuse, but she insisted on spending. Her dad helped me move my few belongings from my parents' house while they were conveniently away visiting Jennifer in Scottsdale. I left a note on the kitchen counter. "Thank you for 18 years. I'll take care of myself from here." I never got a response. Starting college should have been exciting, but mostly it was exhausting. I worked 35 hours a week split between the grocery store and a new job at the campus library. My days started at 5 a.m. and ended near midnight after studying in the quiet corners of the dormitory common room. Meanwhile, Jennifer's social media was full of photos from her apartment parties, expensive dinners, and weekend trips. All funded by the same parents who'd thrown me out for needing basic shelter. My roommate, Ashley, came from a family that sent care packages twice a month. Her parents called every Sunday and visited every few weeks, taking us both out to dinner and treating me like their second daughter. "Your parents never call," Ashley observed one evening as she hung up from her weekly family chat. "We're not really in touch anymore," I said, which was the polite way of saying they'd disowned me for having the audacity to need support. "That's so weird," Ashley said, genuinely confused. "My mom would call the National Guard if I didn't answer her calls." I'd learned not to talk about my family situation. Most people couldn't understand how parents could simply stop caring about a child who'd never caused problems, never rebelled, never given them any reason to withdraw their love, except for the inconvenience of existing. But the real wake-up call came during my sophomore year. I was working a double shift at the grocery store, my feet aching and my back sore from stocking shelves, when I saw them. My parents, pushing a cart full of expensive organic groceries like they didn't have a care in the world. I ducked behind the cereal aisle, watching as they laughed about something together. They looked happy, relaxed, unburdened by the stress of supporting an extra child. "Robert, don't forget we need to transfer money to Jennifer's account," my mother said as they passed my hiding spot. "Her rent's due tomorrow, and she wanted to redecorate her bedroom." "How much this time?" my father asked, but his tone was indulgent, not annoyed. "Just $3,000. She found this amazing vintage furniture set." $3,000 for furniture. More money than I made in 2 months working myself to exhaustion. I waited until they left before finishing my shift, my hands shaking with anger and hurt. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I called my academic advisor and asked about the business program's internship opportunities. If my family wanted me to be independent, I'd show them what real independence looked like. "There's a paid internship with Rodriguez Construction," Mrs. Patterson said, scrolling through her computer. "It's with the same company that built half the new developments in Phoenix. Very competitive." Rodriguez Construction, the same last name as the family who'd taken me in when my own had thrown me away. It turned out to be run by Sarah's uncle, Miguel Rodriguez, who remembered me from family gatherings and was impressed by my work ethic and business classes grades. "Most college kids want the glamorous internships," Miguel said during my interview. "Marketing, PR, social media. But construction is where the real money is. People will always need places to live and work." The internship paid $15 an hour, which was more than both my other jobs combined. But more importantly, Miguel became a mentor, teaching me about real estate development, property management, and the business side of construction. "The secret," he told me one day as we walked through a half-built subdivision, "is understanding that real estate is about people. Everyone needs a place to live, and if you can provide that while treating people fairly, you'll never go out of business." I soaked up every lesson, every bit of advice, every connection Miguel introduced me to. While my classmates were partying and taking spring break trips, I was learning about zoning laws, construction loans, and property values. During my junior year, I had enough saved to move out of the dorms and into a small studio apartment near campus. It wasn't much, just 400 square feet with a kitchenette and a Murphy bed. But it was mine. I'd earned every square inch through my own work. The same week I moved in, Jennifer posted photos of her new apartment upgrade. She'd moved into a luxury complex with a pool, gym, and concierge service. The rent was $2,400 a month, not including utilities or the parking fee for her new BMW, all paid for by parents who claimed they couldn't afford to help their other daughter with basic living expenses. But I was done being bitter. Bitterness was a luxury I couldn't afford. Instead, I channeled my anger into ambition. I started small, using my business classes to create detailed financial plans and market analyses. Miguel was so impressed with my work that he started paying me to research potential development sites. "You have an eye for this," he said, reviewing my report on a rundown strip mall that I'd identified as a perfect redevelopment opportunity. "Most people see problems. You see potential." By my senior year, I'd saved $30,000 and built a network of contacts in the construction and real estate industry. My grades were perfect. I'd been accepted to Arizona State's MBA program with a graduate assistantship, and I had a job offer from Rodriguez Construction waiting for me after graduation. I should have been proud, but mostly, I felt lonely. My parents had never called to ask how I was doing, never shown interest in my achievements, never acknowledged my graduation announcement. They knew where I went to school, knew I was succeeding, but couldn't be bothered to show up for the biggest day of my life. Sarah's entire family came to my graduation, cheering louder than anyone when my name was called for the Dean's List recognition. Mrs. Rodriguez cried like I was her own daughter, and Mr. Rodriguez took more photos than a professional photographer. "We're so proud of you, mija," Mrs. Rodriguez whispered as she hugged me afterward. Look what you've accomplished on your own. But as we celebrated at dinner that night, I couldn't help scanning the restaurant, hoping maybe my parents had decided to surprise me. They never showed. The next morning, I got a text from Jennifer. Saw your graduation pics on Instagram. Cute dress. That was it. No congratulations. No acknowledgement of what I'd achieved. Just a comment about my dress like I was some acquaintance she barely knew. I started my MBA program that fall, working full-time for Miguel while taking evening classes. The pace was brutal, but I'd learned to thrive under pressure. Miguel had promoted me to project manager, overseeing the construction of a 50-unit apartment complex in Tempe. It was a $12 million project, and I was 23 years old, managing contractors, navigating city permits, and keeping everything on schedule and under budget. You're wasted working for someone else, Miguel told me one evening as we reviewed the project timeline. You should be building your own empire. I don't have that kind of capital, I said. Capital isn't just money, he replied. It's knowledge, relationships, reputation. You've got all of that. The money will follow. He was right, but I wasn't ready to take that leap yet. I needed more experience, more connections, more security. The opportunity came during my second year of graduate school. I was researching properties for a class project when I found a listing that made my heart skip a beat. A 20-unit apartment building in Central Phoenix, built in the 1970s and badly managed for years. The owner was motivated to sell, and the price was below market value because most investors were scared off by the condition. But I saw what others missed. The location was perfect, 3 blocks from a major hospital and 2 miles from Arizona State's downtown campus. The building was structurally sound. It just needed cosmetic updates and better management. I ran the numbers over and over. With proper renovations and management, the building could generate $18,000 a month in rental income. The purchase price was $850,000, which seemed impossible until I remembered something Miguel had taught me about partnership opportunities. I called him that night. Miguel, I found a property. I want to make an offer, but I need an investor. He was quiet for a moment. Send me the details. 3 days later, we met at his office with a formal partnership proposal I'd spent 48 hours perfecting. You want to buy a rundown apartment building with mostly my money, Miguel said, reviewing my presentation. I want to renovate and manage a prime real estate investment with your capital and my sweat equity, I corrected. He laughed. You sound like me when I was your age. Okay, here's the deal. I'll provide 80% of the capital. You provide 20% plus all the management and renovation oversight. We split the profits 60-40 after expenses. I stuck out my hand. Deal. 6 months later, I was the managing partner of Phoenix Property Solutions, LLC, owner of the Sunrise Apartments. The renovation had gone perfectly. We'd raised the rents to market rate, and we had a waiting list of potential tenants. More importantly, I'd learned every aspect of property ownership, from dealing with contractors to screening tenants to managing cash flow. Miguel was already talking about our next acquisition, but first I had some personal business to take care of. I'd been tracking my parents' financial situation through public records and social media posts. It wasn't stalking, it was research. And what I'd learned was fascinating. My father's accounting firm had been struggling for years. Corporate clients were moving to larger firms, and individual tax preparation was being replaced by software. His income had dropped significantly, but their spending hadn't adjusted accordingly. They'd taken out a second mortgage on their house to pay for Jennifer's lifestyle. Credit card debt was mounting. And Jennifer, now 25, was still living off their support with no signs of becoming self-sufficient. The house I'd grown up in, The one they'd evicted me from 7 years earlier was now worth $320,000 but carried $285,000 in mortgages. They were house poor and drowning in debt, but still maintaining the facade of financial stability. And then I saw the listing. 1247 Desert View Drive. My childhood home was for sale. The listing price was $315,000, which meant they'd take a loss after realtor fees and closing costs. The description mentioned motivated sellers and priced for quick sale. They were in financial trouble. I called the listing agent from a blocked number, posing as a potential buyer. "Oh yes, this is a great property," the agent Linda said enthusiastically. "The owners are relocating for work and need to sell quickly. They might consider offers below asking price for a cash buyer." Relocating for work. Another lie. My father's firm was failing and they couldn't afford the mortgage payments anymore. I hung up and stared at the listing photos. The house looked exactly the same as when I'd lived there, just older and more worn. The same beige carpet, the same outdated kitchen, the same small bedroom where I'd received my eviction notice. An idea began forming. I called Miguel. "I want to make an offer on another property." "Already? We just finished with Sunrise." "This one's personal." I explained the situation and Miguel was quiet for a long moment. "Madison, are you sure about this? Mixing business with family can get complicated." "They stopped being family when they threw me out," I said. "This is just business." The offer was straightforward. $290,000 cash, 30-day closing, no inspections or contingencies. Below their asking price but enough to cover their mortgages and give them a small amount to start over. They accepted within 24 hours. The closing was handled entirely through lawyers and title companies. I never had to see my parents face to face. They signed the papers, got their check, and transferred ownership to Phoenix Property Solutions, LLC. They never knew their daughter was the buyer. A week after closing, I drove by the house I now owned. There was a moving truck in the driveway, and I could see boxes stacked on the porch. Part of me expected to feel victorious, but mostly, I just felt empty. I parked across the street and watched as my mother carried a lamp to the truck. She looked older, tired, stressed in a way I'd never seen before. My father was directing the movers, but his shoulders were slumped with defeat. Jennifer was nowhere to be seen. According to her Instagram, she was in California on a spa weekend, probably unaware her childhood home was being sold. As the truck pulled away, my mother stood on the porch for a moment, looking back at the house. Even from a distance, I could see her wiping her eyes. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered being 18 years old, holding an eviction notice, begging for just enough time to graduate high school. I drove away without looking back. My plan for the house was simple but strategic. The property was in a good neighborhood with strong rental demand. I'd renovate it completely, removing every trace of my childhood, and rent it to a nice family who would appreciate having a stable, well-maintained home. But first, I had some repairs to make. The house had been neglected for years. The roof needed work, the plumbing was outdated, and the electrical system was a fire hazard waiting to happen. My parents had deferred maintenance to save money, probably for years. I hired Rodriguez Construction to handle the major work, and over the next 3 months, we transformed the property. New roof, updated plumbing and electrical, fresh paint throughout, modern fixtures, and landscaping that actually looked maintained. The cramped bedroom that had been mine became a bright office space. The outdated kitchen got stainless steel appliances and granite countertops. The small living room opened up when we removed a wall, creating an airy, welcoming space. It cost $45,000 in renovations, but when we were finished, the house was worth $380,000 and would rent for $2,200 a month. I listed it on a Thursday morning, By Sunday, I had 12 applications from families desperate to find good housing in a safe neighborhood. I chose the Washingtons, a young couple with 2 kids who both worked as teachers. They were thrilled to find a place they could afford, and I was happy to rent to people who would appreciate what they had. But the real satisfaction came 2 months later. I was reviewing rental applications for a duplex I'd just purchased when I recognized a name on one of the applications: Robert Clark. My father was applying to rent a property from one of my competitors. I pulled his credit report, which as a landlord I had every right to do. The financial picture was worse than I'd imagined. Multiple maxed-out credit cards, late payments, and a bankruptcy filing from 6 months earlier. They'd lost everything. I called the landlord, Pete Martinez, who I knew from the local Real Estate Investors Association. "Pete, I see you have an application from Robert Clark. Mind if I ask what property that's for?" "The duplex on Elm Street. You know it? 3 bedrooms. Needs some work, but he seems desperate enough to take it as is." "What's the rent?" $100. Place probably needs another $500 a month in repairs, but if he's handy, maybe he can work something out." $100 for a rundown duplex in a questionable neighborhood. My father, who used to look down on people who rented instead of owning, was now begging for the chance to pay market rate for substandard housing. "Pete, do me a favor. Reject that application." "Why?" "His credit's shot, but he's got income." "Trust me on this one, I've got a better property for him." Pete shrugged. "Your call. I'll send him a rejection letter tomorrow." That evening, I created a new LLC, Desert Horizon Properties. Completely separate from my other businesses with a different phone number and P.O. box address. Then I placed an ad for a rental property. 3-bedroom house in desirable Phoenix neighborhood, 1 in 200 month. Pet friendly. Available immediately. The property was 1247 Desert View Drive, my childhood home, the house they'd evicted me from, that I now owned, renovated, and was preparing to rent back to them. The irony was almost too perfect. Robert called within an hour of the ad posting. "Hi, I'm interested in the house on Desert View Drive," his voice said through my phone. The same voice that had told me to figure things out on my own 7 years earlier. "Of course," I said, disguising my voice with a slightly higher pitch and a different accent. "When would you like to see it?" "As soon as possible. We're in a bit of a time crunch." A time crunch. Just like I'd been when they'd evicted me with 30 days' notice. "How about tomorrow at 2 p.m.? "Perfect. I'll bring my wife and we can discuss terms." I hung up, my heart pounding. After 7 years, I was about to see my parents again, but this time, I held all the power. I spent the next morning preparing. I bought a blonde wig, sunglasses, and clothes, completely different from my usual style. If they somehow recognized me, it would ruin everything. At exactly 2 p.m., I parked across the street and watched a tired-looking Honda Civic pull into the driveway of what used to be my home. My parents got out slowly, like people who'd aged more than 7 years should. Robert's hair was mostly gray now, and he moved like his back hurt. Carol had gained weight and looked exhausted, her clothes wrinkled and her purse obviously old and worn. They stood in front of the house for a moment and I could see them talking. Probably remembering when they'd lived here, when they'd owned something instead of being at the mercy of landlords. I waited 5 minutes, then knocked on the front door. "Mr. and Mrs. Clark? I'm Jennifer from Desert Horizon Properties." Using my sister's name felt appropriate somehow. They turned, and for a terrifying moment, I thought my father's eyes lingered on my face. But then he smiled, the polite, desperate smile of someone who needed something from a stranger. "Thank you so much for meeting us on short notice," Carol said. "We really need to find a place quickly." "Of course," I said, unlocking the door they'd locked me out of years ago. "Let me show you around." Walking through that house with them was surreal. They marveled at the renovations, the modern kitchen, the open floor plan, completely unaware they were touring the home they'd once shared with their younger daughter. "This is beautiful," Carol said, running her hand along the granite countertops. "So much nicer than the places we've been looking at." "The previous owners really let it run down," I said carefully, "but the new owner invested heavily in bringing it up to modern standards." Robert nodded approvingly. "Smart investment. Location like this, these improvements probably added $60,000 to the value." If only he knew he was looking at his former home, bought with money his daughter had earned after he'd thrown her out with nothing. "The rent is $200 a month," I continued, "plus utilities. First month, last month, and security deposit upfront." "That's $3,600, Robert said, and I could see him calculating in his head. "We can make that work." Could they? I'd seen their credit report. I knew about the bankruptcy, the failed business, the debt they were still carrying. "I'll need to run a credit check and verify employment," I said. The look that passed between them told me everything. They were hoping their desperation would override standard rental procedures. "Our credit has been better," Carol admitted. "We had some business troubles and had to file for bankruptcy. But Robert has steady income now, and we're very responsible tenants." Responsible tenants. The people who'd evicted their own daughter were asking a stranger to trust them with property. "I understand that sometimes good people hit rough patches," I said, echoing words I'd heard from landlords who'd been kind to me when I was struggling. "Let me see what I can do." Relief flooded their faces. They thought they'd found someone who would work with them, someone who wouldn't judge them for their financial mistakes. If only they knew. "There is one thing," I continued. "The owner is very particular about tenants. He's had some bad experiences with people who don't appreciate nice properties." "We would take excellent care of it," Robert said quickly. "We understand how fortunate we'd be to live somewhere this nice." Fortunate. The man who'd told his 18-year-old daughter that life wasn't fair was now talking about feeling fortunate to rent a decent home. "I believe you," I said. "Let me make some calls and see what I can arrange." We exchanged contact information, and I told them I'd call by the end of the week with a decision. As they walked back to their car, I heard Carol say, "I have a good feeling about this one." A good feeling. If she only knew. That night, I called Miguel to discuss the situation. "You're really going to rent to them?" he asked. "Why not? They need housing. I have housing to rent. It's just business." "Madison, we both know this isn't just business." He was right, but I wasn't ready to examine my motives too closely. "They'll pay rent on time," I said. "They can't afford not to." "And when they find out who their landlord really is?" "They won't. Everything goes through the property management company. As far as they know, they're renting from Desert Horizon Properties." Miguel was quiet for a moment. "Just be careful. Revenge has a way of costing more than you expect." But I wasn't seeking revenge. I was providing housing to people who needed it. If there was a certain poetic justice to the situation, that was just a bonus. I called Robert the next morning. "Mr. Clark, this is Jennifer from Desert Horizon Properties. I have good news about the house on Desert View Drive." "Really?" The hope in his voice was almost painful to hear. "Yes, the owner has approved your application. He was impressed by your honesty about your credit situation and believes you'll take good care of the property." "That's wonderful news. When can we move in?" "As soon as you can provide the upfront payment. $3,600 total." There was a pause. "Would it be possible to do $2,000 now and the rest by the end of the month?" I could hear the desperation creeping in. They didn't even have $3,600 liquid. "I'm sorry, but the owner requires the full amount up front. It's company policy." "Of course," Robert said quickly. "We'll have it. When do you need it?" "Tomorrow would be ideal. We have other interested parties." It was a lie, but I wanted to see what they'd do under pressure. "We'll have it," he said firmly. "Thank you so much for this opportunity." The next day, Robert showed up at the property management office with a cashier's check for $3,600. I later learned he'd borrowed the money from Jennifer, who'd finally gotten a part-time job at an art gallery, but was still receiving monthly supplements from what was left of their parents' savings. The irony was perfect. Jennifer's rent money, funded by years of my parents' financial support, was now being used to pay rent to the sister they'd discarded. The lease signing was handled by the property management company I'd hired. I watched from my car as my parents walked into their new home, their old home, carrying boxes and looking grateful for the chance to live somewhere decent. Over the next few months, I monitored the situation carefully. Rent came in on time every month, automatically deducted from Robert's checking account. The property management company sent me monthly reports. No complaints, no maintenance requests, no problems. They were model tenants, taking care of a property they didn't know they'd once owned, but I wanted more than just rent payments. I wanted to understand what their life looked like now, what consequences they were living with for the choices they'd made. So I did what any good landlord does. I conducted periodic property inspections. The first inspection was scheduled for a Tuesday morning when Robert would be at work. I called ahead, speaking to Carol in my disguised voice. "Mrs. Clark, this is Jennifer from Desert Horizon Properties. I need to schedule a routine inspection of the property. How does tomorrow at 10 a.m. work for you?" "Of course," Carol said. "Should I be there?" "If you're available, yes. It's always good to walk through with the tenant." The next morning, I knocked on the door of my childhood home, wearing the same blonde wig and sunglasses I'd used for the initial showing. Carol answered, looking nervous, the way tenants always do when the landlord comes around. "Hi, Jennifer. Come in. Can I offer you some coffee?" "That would be lovely. Thank you." Walking through the house with her was strange and satisfying in equal measure. She was obviously proud of how clean and well-maintained everything was, pointing out small improvements they'd made with their own money. "We replaced the shower head in the master bathroom," she said. "The water pressure is so much better now." "That's wonderful. The owner appreciates tenants who take care of the property." In what used to be my bedroom, now converted to an office, Carol had set up a small desk with a computer and neat stacks of TM papers. "I've been doing bookkeeping from home," she said. "Just small businesses, but it helps with income." She was working again, probably for the first time in years. The woman who'd never had a job while I was growing up was now scrambling to contribute to the household finances. "That's smart," I said. "Every bit helps." "Robert says we're lucky to have found this place," Carol continued as we walked through the living room. "Most landlords won't rent to people with our credit history." "Everyone deserves a second chance," I said, the words tasting both kind and bitter. As we finished the inspection, Carol hesitated by the front door. "Can I ask you something?" she said. My heart stopped. Had she recognized me somehow? "Of course." "Do you know anything about the previous owners? This house? It feels familiar somehow. Like I've been here before." I kept my expression neutral. "I believe it was owned by a family for many years. The Clarks, I think? Maybe you knew them?" "Clark," she repeated slowly. "That's our name too, but no relation. What a coincidence." She had no idea she was standing in her former home, talking to her estranged daughter about the family she'd destroyed. "Small world," I said. Over the next year, I conducted quarterly inspections, each one giving me glimpses into their new reality. The house was always immaculate, maintained better than when they'd lived there as owners. They'd installed a small garden in the backyard, something they'd never bothered with before. Robert looked older each time I saw him, the stress of financial insecurity etched in the lines around his eyes. Carol seemed smaller, diminished, like someone who'd lost more than just a house. But it was during the fourth inspection that I learned the most. Carol was in the kitchen making coffee when her phone rang. She glanced at it and sighed. I should take this. It's Jennifer. My sister's name still startled me, even though I'd been using it as an alias. Of course, I said. Take your time. Carol answered with forced cheerfulness. Hi, honey. How are you? I could hear Jennifer's voice through the phone, loud and demanding as always. Mom, I need you to send me $800. My car needs repairs and I don't get paid until next week. Carol's face fell. 800, honey? We really can't afford. What do you mean you can't afford it? It's an emergency. We're just struggling right now. The bankruptcy, the move, starting over. You always have money for what you need. Jennifer's voice rose. Why is it different now? I watched my mother's shoulders sag under the weight of her daughter's entitlement. Things have changed, Jennifer. We're living paycheck to paycheck now. Well, figure it out. I can't be stuck without a car. The call ended abruptly, leaving Carol staring at her phone with tears in her eyes. She looked up and seemed surprised to see me still standing there. I'm sorry, she said, wiping her eyes. Family stuff. I understand, I said gently. Is everything okay? Carol laughed bitterly. My older daughter needs money for car repairs. She's used to us being able to help, but we can't anymore. She doesn't understand how much our situation has changed. She sat down at the kitchen table, suddenly looking exhausted. We used to be able to fix any problem with money, she continued. Car trouble, apartment deposit, unexpected expenses. We thought we were helping our kids by always bailing them out. But now that we can't, they don't know how to handle problems on their own. The irony was staggering. She was describing exactly what they'd forced me to learn at 18, but she still didn't see the connection. What about your other daughter? I asked carefully. Does she need financial help too? Carol's expression darkened. We don't really talk to Madison anymore. She was always so independent, so determined to do everything herself. We thought she'd be fine without our help. And was she? I don't know, Carol admitted. She graduates college soon, I think. Or maybe she already did. I see things on Facebook sometimes. But we're not. We're not in touch. She didn't even know I'd graduated 2 years ago, that I owned my own business, that I was successful beyond anything they'd imagined when they'd thrown me out. That must be hard, I said. It is, Carol said quietly. Sometimes I wonder if we made mistakes, if we should have done things differently. For a moment, I felt a flicker of something that might have been forgiveness. My mother, sitting in the kitchen of our old house, admitting she'd made mistakes. But then she continued. But Jennifer needed us more. She was always more sensitive, more artistic. Madison was tough, practical. We knew she'd figure things out. And just like that, the moment was gone. Even in her regret, she was still making excuses, still justifying why one daughter deserved support and the other deserved abandonment. Well, I said, standing up, I should finish the inspection. The rest of the visit was routine, but I left with a better understanding of their current reality. They were trapped in a cycle of their own making, supporting a daughter who would never become independent while missing the daughter who'd already built a successful life without them. That evening, I looked at Jennifer's social media for the first time in months. Her posts told the story clearly. Expensive dinners she couldn't afford, complaints about her car, subtle hints about needing money. She was 27 years old and still expecting her bankrupt parents to solve her problems. Meanwhile, I'd bought 2 more rental properties, expanded my business partnership with Miguel, and been accepted to a graduate program in real estate development. My net worth had crossed $500,000, and I was building an empire one property at a time. The contrast wasn't lost on me, but the real reckoning came during my 5th inspection, almost 18 months after my parents had moved back into their old house. I arrived to find Carol crying at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills and legal documents. "Mrs. Clark, are you all right?" I asked, momentarily forgetting to disguise my voice. She looked up, startled, then tried to compose herself. "I'm sorry, Jennifer. I didn't hear you come in. I'm just having a difficult day." "What's wrong?" Carol hesitated, then seemed to decide she needed to tell someone. "My husband lost his job yesterday. The accounting firm finally closed. And our daughter needs money for—" She gestured helplessly at the papers. "I don't even know what for anymore. We can't help her, but she keeps calling, keeps demanding, keeps acting like we're being selfish for not giving her money we don't have." "That sounds overwhelming," I said. "The worst part is, we have another daughter. We haven't spoken to her in years because we thought she didn't need us. But now I wonder if she would have been there for us the way Jennifer expects us to be there for her." She looked directly at me, and for a terrifying moment, I thought she'd recognized something. "Do you have children, Jennifer?" "No," I lied. "Well, when you do, remember that love isn't just about giving them what they want. Sometimes it's about teaching them to handle disappointment, to solve their own problems, to be strong when things get hard." The advice was 27 years too late, but hearing it still hurt. "We failed both our daughters," Carol continued. "We spoiled one so much she can't function without us, and we abandoned the other when she needed us most. Now we're losing our home again, and neither of them knows or cares." "You're losing the house?" Carol nodded, wiping her eyes. "Without Robert's income, we can't make rent. We've been looking for apartments we can afford, but with our credit and no job." She trailed off. "Have you talked to your landlord? Maybe worked out a payment plan?" "We tried calling, but the property management company said the owner doesn't negotiate. Pay in full or get evicted." I hadn't authorized that response, but the property management company was protecting my interests according to standard procedure. "How much time do you have?" I asked. 30 days, Carol said with a bitter laugh. "Same notice we gave Madison when she turned 18. I guess what goes around comes around." She'd made the connection. Finally, after all these years, she understood the cruelty of what they'd done to me. But understanding and consequences are different things. That evening, I sat in my own home, a beautiful house I'd bought with cash in Scottsdale's most prestigious neighborhood, and made a decision. I called the property management company. "This is Madison Clark, owner of the Desert View property. I understand the Clark family is having financial difficulties." "Yes, Ms. Clark. Mr. Clark lost his job and they've requested a payment plan. Per your instructions, we declined. I want to make them an offer. They can stay in the property rent-free for 6 months while they get back on their feet, with the understanding that they'll pay back rent once they're financially stable again." "That's very generous. Should I call Mr. Clark with the offer?" "Yes, but I want to deliver the news personally. Set up a meeting at the property tomorrow evening. Tell them the owner wants to discuss their situation in person." "Of course. What name should I give them for the owner?" "Tell them the owner's name is Madison." The next evening, I parked across the street from 1247 Desert View Drive and watched my parents prepare for a meeting that would change everything. They'd dressed nicely, probably hoping to make a good impression on the mysterious landlord who held their housing situation in his hands. Robert wore his best suit, the one he'd worn to court hearings during the bankruptcy. Carol had put on makeup and styled her hair, trying to look like someone deserving of mercy. At exactly 6 p.m., I walked up to the front door of my childhood home and knocked. Robert answered, his face arranged in a hopeful, desperate expression. "Mr. Madison?" he said, extending his hand. "Thank you so much for agreeing to meet with us. We really appreciate—" He stopped mid-sentence, his face going pale as recognition dawned. "Hello, Dad," I said quietly. "Hello, Mom." Carol appeared behind Robert, took one look at me, and sat down hard on the nearest chair. "Madison," she whispered, "what are you doing here?" "I'm your landlord," I said, stepping into the house. "I own this property. I've owned it for 2 years now." The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of everything that had happened, everything that had been said and left unsaid. Robert found his voice first. "You bought our house?" "Yes. I bought it when you were foreclosed on. I renovated it, and I've been renting it back to you ever since." "But the property management company said—" "The property management company works for me. They handle my rental portfolio." Carol looked around the living room like she was seeing it for the first time. "You've been our landlord this whole time?" "For 18 months, yes. I've conducted every inspection, taken every rent payment, handled every maintenance request." "The woman who came here," Carol said slowly. "Jennifer from Desert Horizon Properties. That was you?" I pulled off the blonde wig and sunglasses I'd worn to every interaction. "Yes." Robert sank into a chair next to Carol, his face gray with shock, and what might have been shame. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you do this?" "Because you needed housing, and I had housing to rent. It's a business transaction." "But you could have told us. You could have said who you were." "Like you told me I had 30 days to get out of this house when I turned 18? The words came out harder than I'd intended. "Like you asked if I had anywhere to go, or any way to support myself?" Carol started crying, not the gentle tears from earlier, but deep, wrenching sobs. "Madison, we're so sorry," she said through her tears. "We made terrible mistakes. We were wrong about everything." "Yes, you were." Robert leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "Can you forgive us?" The question hung in the air between us. Could I forgive them? Did I want to? "I don't know," I said honestly. "But that's not why I'm here." "Then why are you here?" I pulled a folder from my bag and set it on the coffee table, the same coffee table where they'd served Jennifer birthday cake while I worked double shifts to pay for my own celebration. "You're behind on rent, and Robert lost his job. According to the lease, I could evict you with 30 days' notice." They both flinched at the words, finally understanding how it felt to be on the receiving end. "But," I continued, "I'm prepared to make you an offer. You can stay in this house rent-free for 6 months while you get back on your feet. After that, we'll work out a payment plan for the back rent." "Why would you do that?" Robert asked. "Because unlike you, I don't throw family members out on the street when they need help." The words hit them like physical blows. Carol's crying intensified, and Robert put his head in his hands. "There are conditions," I continued. "First, you have to cut off financial support to Jennifer, completely. No more rent money, no more car payments, no more emergency funds. She's 27 years old, and it's time she learned to support herself." "She can't survive without our help," Carol protested. "I was 18 when you decided I had to survive without your help. Jennifer is 9 years older and has had nearly a decade of your support. She'll figure it out." Robert nodded slowly. "What else?" "Second, you both have to get jobs and start contributing to the household again. I don't care what kind of jobs, but you have to try." "Of course," Robert said. "I've been applying everywhere." "Third, you have to pay back rent from the months you lived here rent-free. Not immediately, but over time, as you're able." They looked at each other, then back at me. "And fourth," I said, "you have to acknowledge what you did to me, not just privately, but publicly. I want Jennifer to know the whole story. I want your friends and family to understand that you threw your 18-year-old daughter out of this house while paying thousands of dollars a month to support your adult daughter's lifestyle." The color drained from both their faces. "Madison," Carol said quietly, "please don't ask us to do that. The shame would be unbearable." The shame was unbearable for me too, I replied, but I lived with it anyway. Robert straightened his shoulders, and for a moment, he looked like the father I'd once respected. You're right, he said. We owe you that and more. We'll do whatever you ask. All of it? I pressed. Even telling Jennifer the truth? Even that? I opened the folder and pulled out a modified lease agreement. Then sign this, and you can stay. They read through the document carefully. It outlined everything we'd discussed. 6 months rent-free, gradual repayment of back rent, no financial support for Jennifer, and a formal acknowledgement of their past treatment of me. Carol signed first, her hand shaking as she wrote her name. Robert followed, his signature heavy and deliberate. There's one more thing, I said as they finished signing. They looked up nervously. I want to have a relationship with you again. Not like before, and not immediately, but eventually. I want us to be a family, a real family, where everyone matters and everyone is treated with respect. Carol burst into fresh tears, but this time they seemed like tears of relief. We want that too, she said, more than anything. It's going to take time, I warned. I'm not going to pretend the last 9 years didn't happen, and I'm not going to let you rewrite history to make yourselves feel better. We understand, Robert said. We'll do whatever it takes. I stood up, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of the conversation. I'll call you next week, I said. We can start figuring out what a relationship looks like going forward. As I reached the door, Carol called out, Madison? I turned back. We're proud of you, she said. We should have said that years ago, but we're proud of who you've become. I know, I said. I'm proud of me too. Walking back to my car, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not complete peace, and not the satisfaction of revenge I'd thought I wanted. Just the quiet peace of knowing I'd chosen kindness over cruelty, generosity over vengeance. The next few months were complicated and sometimes painful. Jennifer reacted to the loss of financial support exactly as I'd expected, with anger, accusations, and demands that our parents choose between their daughters. For the first time in their lives, they chose me. Jennifer cut off contact, claiming she was the victim of a conspiracy between her parents and sister. Her social media filled with vague posts about family betrayal and ungrateful relatives. Within 6 months, she'd moved back in with a college boyfriend and was working full-time for the first time in her adult life. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was the life she needed to build character and self-sufficiency. Robert found a job with a small accounting firm, making less money than before, but enough to contribute to the household. Carol expanded her bookkeeping business and discovered she had a talent for helping small business owners organize their finances. Slowly, carefully, we began building a relationship based on mutual respect instead of obligation and guilt. It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, arguments, moments when old patterns reasserted themselves. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I had parents who saw me as an individual worth knowing, not just a problem to be managed. 2 years later, I stood in the backyard of 1247 Desert View Drive, watching Robert teach my 6-year-old nephew how to throw a baseball. Carol was inside, cooking dinner for the extended Rodriguez family, who'd become like grandparents to me and were now being welcomed into my biological family's life. Sarah and her husband were there with their new baby, along with Miguel and his wife. The house was full of laughter and conversation, the family gatherings I'd always dreamed of having. Jennifer was noticeably absent, still holding on to her anger and refusing to participate in family events unless she received an apology for the financial abuse of cutting off her support. We sent her invitations to every gathering, but she never came. Some bridges take longer to rebuild than others. As the evening wound down and guests started heading home, I found myself alone in the kitchen with my parents. "Thank you," Carol said quietly. for giving us a second chance. Thank you for taking it, I replied. Robert looked around the kitchen, the same kitchen where they'd planned my eviction 9 years earlier. Do you ever regret buying this house? He asked, keeping us as tenants instead of just letting us face the consequences of our choices. I considered the question carefully. Sometimes I think it would have been easier to just let you fail completely. But easier isn't always better. What made you decide to help us instead of letting us get evicted? Honestly, I realized that revenge was just another form of letting you control my life. I didn't want to waste any more energy on anger. Carol smiled through tears. You're a better person than we deserved. I'm the person I became because of what I went through, I said. The good and the bad. I wouldn't change that, even if I could. As they headed home, to the house I owned but that felt like theirs again, I stayed behind to lock up. Walking through the empty rooms, I remembered the scared 18-year-old who'd stood in that hallway holding an eviction notice. She'd had no idea that the worst thing her parents could do to her would turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to her. Being thrown out had taught me self-reliance, resilience, and the value of earning what I had. It had led me to the Rodriguez family, who'd shown me what real love looked like. It had motivated me to build a business empire that now provided housing for dozens of families. Most importantly, it had taught me the difference between being strong and being cruel, between helping and enabling, between love and control. My parents had spent years trying to teach Jennifer those lessons through financial support and endless second chances. But you can't buy character development, and you can't love someone into becoming responsible. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their choices. And sometimes, when they've learned from those consequences, the kindest thing you can do is offer them a chance to start over. I'd given my parents that chance, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved to be the kind of person who could forgive without forgetting, who could choose healing over hatred. As I locked the door of 1247 Desert View Drive and headed home to my own house in Scottsdale, I thought about the full circle my life had taken. I'd started in that house as an unwanted burden, been evicted as an inconvenience, and returned as the owner with the power to determine my family's fate. But the real power hadn't been in owning their home or controlling their housing situation. The real power had been in choosing how to use that control. I'd chosen compassion over revenge, relationship over isolation, growth over stagnation. And in doing so, I'd finally become the person I'd always wanted to be. Someone who broke cycles instead of perpetuating them, who built bridges instead of burning them, who understood that true strength comes not from the ability to hurt others, but from the wisdom to know when healing is more powerful than harm. The scared 18-year-old with the eviction notice had grown up to become her parents' landlord. But more importantly, she'd grown up to become the kind of person who could use that power to create something better than what came before. That was the real victory.